Here is the full story of Naomi according to the Bible. Naomi appears in the Old Testament book of Ruth, which takes place during the time of the judges in Israel. Her story begins in the land of Bethlehem during a time of famine. Naomi, her husband Elimelech, and their two sons Mahlon and Chilion, decide to leave Bethlehem and go to Moab in search of food and sustenance. While they are in Moab, Naomi's husband Elimelech dies. Naomi is left only with her two sons, who ended up marrying Moabite women named Orpah and Ruth. They lived in Moab for about 10 years, but tragedy strikes again when both of Naomi's sons die, leaving her alone with her daughters-in-law. Upon hearing that the famine in Bethlehem is over, Naomi decides to return to her homeland. She encourages her daughters-in-law to stay in Moab and remarry, seeking a better future for themselves. Orpah eventually decides to part ways with Naomi and return to her family, but Ruth insists on staying with her. Naomi and Ruth then make their way back to Bethlehem, where they arrive at the beginning of the barley harvest. Because they are poor, Ruth decides to go and gather leftover grain in the fields of a wealthy landowner named Boaz, who happens to be a relative of Naomi's. Boaz shows kindness to Ruth and allows her to continue gleaning in his fields. Naomi realizes that Boaz could potentially be a good match for Ruth and decides to devise a plan. She instructs Ruth to go to the threshing floor at night where Boaz is working in, after he falls asleep, to uncover his feet and lay down. Startled, Boaz awakens to find Ruth at his feet and praises her for her loyalty to Naomi and willingness to take care of her. Recognizing the opportunity, Naomi advises Ruth to ask Boaz to fulfill his duty as a kinsman redeemer. In the Hebrew tradition, a kinsman redeemer is a relative who has the right to rescue a widowed woman by marrying her and providing for her. Ruth follows Naomi's advice, and Boaz agrees to act as the kinsman redeemer, allowing him to marry Ruth and redeem Elimelech's family land. Boaz and Ruth eventually get married, and Naomi rejoices at the great outcome for her daughter-in-law. Ruth and Boaz have a son named Obed, who becomes the grandfather of King David. Naomi becomes a caregiver and nurse to her grandson Obed, experiencing joy and restoration after the hardships she faced.